Dr. Ott, you've just talked to us about the ways that the language we use matters and the importance of being mindful of this as we try to have ministries that are helpful with respect to negotiating gender issues and gender disparity. And I know in my own ministry, the way that came up in a reasonably progressive church was a tension between we want the spirituality to reflect, or the prayers to reflect, the familial way in which Jesus talked about God without necessarily invoking the patriarchal or male-dominated language. And that's really hard to tease out. What do you counsel ministers on questions like those?
Well, I don't think we should lose any of the language necessarily. I know there are many advocates that say there are just certain aspects of patriarchal language that must go. Father must go. Lord must go. So I think there's one way which we can sort of historically reclaim it, which is given what we know about Jesus and Jesus' ministry, when he said things like Father, he probably meant a very different kind of father relationship. And based on what he did with regard to gender issues, he meant a much more inclusive kind of relationship than folks who use father language to reestablish a patriarchal male in the household. So we could reclaim it historically and say there's a purpose, perhaps, to why Jesus used this language. But also, that language was a way that Jesus most connected in that relationship. It may also just be part of the way the times were, and that's the language he had available to him. So in our youth ministry, we could do the same things. We can make different kinds of language available to teenagers. So I think this is a part where we need to be attentive to ourselves. What's going on with gender and language for me? How do I most associate with God? I may prefer to use female pronouns or environmental nature kinds of images, because that's where I feel connected to God. Do I then force all of the youth that I work with to use that language? No, because they're going to connect with God based on their own experience of God and what most matters in their life. So as a professional, it's my responsibility to create space and opportunities and even use language I might be uncomfortable with to give them examples of ways they might connect with God. And I think it's also important within youth ministry context to have our youth model for one another that they use different kinds of language, both about God as well as about creation. And so in that manner, we're doing that everyday practice of passing along gender negotiation when it comes to our theological values and our notions of God.